Alright, hi guys. So I was here last month, my first time, and so I introduced everyone to the site and what it's about, just because we were having a clinic and we've been having a few technical difficulties with it. But there were a lot of people there talking about the blogs that they run, and they're often quite academic things, very in-depth and cerebral, and then they bring up this site, thewellreadmage.com, and there's a big image of the Ninja Turtles. So that was quite a tonal shift, but Kim was interested, so he asked me to just speak about it for a little bit. So it's the Well-Read Mage, and I'm going to explain what the title means and everything about it. I first started reading this back in mid-2016, and then ever since August 2017 I've been contributing to it. And so, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the story of how it was founded and established, and then what it's currently doing now, how it came to have that form. Then I'm probably going to talk a little bit about what the future of it may be, and then give my personal feelings of it, because I do feel that even though it's just a blog on WordPress about gaming, that being a part of it has really changed me in ways that I didn't really expect to happen. So, it was founded by Moses Norton, who was born in 1985 in Hawaii, and he grew up doing three things. One of them was studying divinity, the other was reading comic books, and the third was playing video games. So, on the 20th of September 2012, he published his first blog post, which was Christian Thoughts 1 on the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And that was inspired by having read the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and he was so moved by it that he wanted to write down his thoughts and share them with people. At the time, his brother was writing on another blog that was called Norton Photography, and so that led to it being called Norton Literature. What happened was, this was on Blogspot initially. This is before he joined WordPress. And he was also teaching a Bible studies course at a college, which is why this eventually developed into a parallel of that, where the notes that he was developing and preparing for that course, he would also put on the Norton Literature site on Blogspot, just to share with people, because he thought it was something interesting to do. He had been studying Christian systematic theology. I'm not sure that I know what that really means, but he used this site as an output for that. But it eventually ceased publication on the 30th of March 2015, because at the time he was about to become a father and he just didn't have the time to really commit to it anymore. So after that, he wanted a way to continue blogging and speaking to people, while he would also still have the time to prepare for being a parent, and so he started a Facebook page called Avid Gamers, which never really went anywhere. This was only a few months later. It didn't ever come to have many members, but it was during that time that he thought, you know what, the thing I've always wanted to do is to blog about video games, because being a child of the 80s, he grew up playing a lot of old, retro, 8-bit, 16-bit, pixelated games. And so he decided, I'm finally going to do that. What I'm going to do is, I'm going to start a video game blog. He had briefly run another site called Griffiths and Quips, which was about comic books. And that was on WordPress. It was the first time he moved to WordPress. That also didn't really ever go anywhere for him, and the site doesn't exist anymore, and there's no photographic evidence of it. But it's because he'd already moved to WordPress because of that he thought, I'm going to put it on WordPress, that's where I'm going to put it. And I will call it Red Mage Reviews, because in the Final Fantasy games, a mage is a magician character, and they all have different colours that tells you what kind of magic they can cast and the spells they can use and things like that. But it was then his wife Blythe who thought, why not the well-read mage, as in well-read, except the colour red instead. So actually she's to credit for coming up with that name. So he set up the well-read mage, and it was themed on Final Fantasy, which is just a fantasy series of video games. Initially that game was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System, And the thing about that is that it inspired the red on black theme, because a lot of the times the text is red on black, and that was inspired by this. A lot of it is also just because he finds it personally easiest to read when it's red on black. But the reason that the NES had a lot of black backgrounds is because it made the sprites easier to see. So what's a sprite? This is a sprite. They're the little characters that you would get in old retro games. They'd be called a sprite. And he decided, you know what? I'm not just going to call the site the Well-Read Mage. That is going to be my pen name for when I'm writing this. And so, if that's going to be a sort of alias or character card, I'm going to visually represent it. That's how he came up with this character of being a red mage, directly inspired by the same design from the original games. So, these were all designed by Blythe as well. She doesn't really do much of the writing for the blog, but she does a lot of the graphic design. So she's really the visual side of it. And he then founded it with her and two of his friends, and they decided, right, we're going to be the founding members of this. We're going to be the original 4 writers, which means that if you're going to use their name, we should use their name. Because if we're going to have these little characters, they should be called something. So at that point, Blythe decided, well, if I'm the proofreader, then I should be called the Whiteout Mage, like Whiteout, like Tippix. And then his 2 friends became the Tiny Mage and the Black Humour Mage, just because Black Mage is already a character in the games, and he thought, well, I've got quite a macabre sense of humour, so I'll go with that. And so Blythe designed all of these. These are original designs, but they are heavily inspired by the original video game character versions. Since they founded it, all of these people have come to be writers for it at some point. These are not all regularly putting content on the site, but these are everyone who has written at least an article once at some point. A lot of them have since moved on to do other things. So as we start on the left, most of these people you're probably not going to see around anymore, whereas when we get toward the end, they're the more recent initiates. So they're writing the articles right now. But we believe that once you join up, you'll always see it and you can come back at any time. There are no deadlines, there are no quotas, you don't have to write so many words or articles a week. Essentially, it's a site for you to use how you want, just as long as you stick to the general template. We don't really believe in concepts that a lot of other sites do, because it's for us. We get from it what we bring to it. And Moses is just a facilitator. He just makes things happen, and he now considers himself to be the person who started it, but not the owner. We think of it as just being co-owned. It's just this big co-owned joint webzine. Well, technically it's a hyperzine, not to get pedantic. And so when you become a writer for the site, you get your own little character. So I am one of these people, and I'm going to get onto that and how it was inspired and the name that I came up with. So this is everyone who ever has contributed to it, but not necessarily does anymore, but they can come back at any time. And so it began on the 20th of February 2016 when he published his first review, and that was for Final Fantasy XIII. And now you'll notice here it begins with a literary quote, and that's partially because of the whole well-read wordplay, but also because to connect it with other more traditionally credible mediums like literature, we tend to open it with a quote because we believe that actually you can talk about gaming in a very analytical way, in a very complex way, and that they are credible and that they are legitimate. Because the video game industry last year made more money than the Hollywood film industry and the music industry combined. So it's the entertainment medium that matters to the most people. And so we want to prove that it doesn't have to be like it mostly is on the internet, where there's not very intelligent discourse, where it's just insulting, there's lots of identity politics, there's lots of manufactured controversies, and none of it matters. We thought we can talk about the games for the games, and for nothing else. For nothing else. So that's why we tend to have those quotes there. The thing about this particular post, the first one, is that being so early on, he wrote it before he really developed his critic's voice. So a lot of the humour in it is very forced, it's just not the kind of thing that comes naturally to him, and you can tell reading it now if you know him quite well. But he still stands by this review because everyone has a post like this. If you've been a blogger for long enough, you'll have something like this where you think, I'm not happy with that, but I'm going to keep it there just for the posterity of it. Also, this doesn't really have a very good reputation amongst gamers, so it was an easy target for him. What matters is, though, that it also happens to be the favourite game of another blogger called Lightning Ellen. She likes the game so much that she took the name Lightning in her name from the protagonist of the game. She saw this article and she decided, right, I'm going to defend it, and I'm going to explain why actually I think it's quite a good game. But when we think about internet comment sections, there's often quite a lot of rudeness and dismissiveness and name calling, and it just gets very childish. But Ellen decided, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say what I think, and I'm going to put a reasonable, mature argument, and hopefully it might lead to a discussion, which it did. And they had a very interesting debate and conversation that was respectful in disagreement, which often doesn't tend to happen on the internet very much. And so that inspired him from that moment, thinking, right, this can happen, this is possible. For gaming, this was a big thing. So he knew from that point that he had to make it a core value of the site. Now, Lightning Ellen also runs the Livid Lightning site, and she has since started writing for the world of Mage. She writes under the name The Livid Lightning Mage. That was a name she took because of her blog. Not everyone names their little character version of themselves after their blog, but some do. So that's the kind of thing that it led to, with people just becoming friends and respectfully disagreeing with each other. So what you'll get with the well-read Mage, after the main body of the review text, which is going to be very analytical and complex and thinking closely, you'll get the 8-bit review, which breaks it down into 8 different components. Now you'll notice here that there are more than 8 bits. A controversial thing in gaming is exactly how you talk about gaming, because it's such an interactive medium that combines so many different principles. Do you judge it as one thing, or do you think about it in lots of different ways? So the reason that we have a long analytical article first, and then we go into the individual components, is because we just try to combine it so that people can get from it whatever they want. Generally, we're encouraged in an article to use visuals, audio, gameplay, and then our personal grade as the main 4, and then the other 4 we can just choose from whatever. Each of these symbols represents something different. Like, for instance, accessibility up there is how easy would it be to just pick up and play straight away. For instance, a game like Pac-Man, anyone can get into, but in something like World of Warcraft, there's so much going on and so much you have to think about, you're not going to get straight into it straight away. So it's that sort of thing. These are all symbols next to the headings of the paragraphs representing it. Just make it easy to find, and they're like chapter titles. So, see, this is a graphic that was put up on Twitter, where it was explaining that the problem with modern criticism on the internet is that no one really understands the whole point of a 1 to 10 review scale. It used to be that 10 was the best, and that 5 was average. 5 is not a bad score, because saying it's average is saying it's as good as every other game. But for some reason now, it's got to the point where really it's only an 8 is where you're saying it's good. And then if you like a game, then it's just a 10 immediately, and you just ignore all of its flaws and imperfections, and anything less than that is just saying you didn't like it. This is a big problem, because this is part of the broken discourse that we're trying to fix. And so we believe in a return to the traditional 1 to 10, where each different number represents a different scale. Because also, that way, it's just better for the consumer. Because if they understand that we're just using each different number equally as being a different degree, then it's just easier for everyone. Because if we give out a 10 to everything, then a 10 essentially doesn't matter. So then you can think, well, they give everything a 10, so the 10 isn't sacred anymore, which it should be, because 10 represents the best. For instance, the aggregated score of a game will be the average of each of the different 8 bits of it that we review, and then that will be rounded down to the 10th scale. So Achtung Cthulhu Tactics in total was rated a 5.1 on average, whereas you compare that to the Game Gear's port of Sonic the Hedgehog, which on average was a 5.9. They're both 5s, but one's a 5.1 and one's a 5.9, just because when you're being more precise, it's just easier for people to understand because you're giving them more information. And also, when you're reviewing lots of different games, you really need the overall score to be more precise, because then it's easier to compare them with each other and to understand them in relation to each other. Once an article has been reviewed, it will be archived, and right now we've got 3 different pages for the archive, and it's a very primitive system where it's just a list with links, and every time we have to add it in manually and sort it ourselves. That's because we're still using .com, not .org, so we haven't really got the right kind of thing that would be able to make it easier. Ideally, we would just have one page, and then you could sort it yourself, it would be interactive, but we haven't quite got there yet. Archive by audio, I'm going to leave for now, because that's a bit different, but we'll come back to that. For instance, these are all really self-explanatory, because archive by here will tell you just in order of publication, because we don't only review games, sometimes we review like books and things, a handful of times, not often, but again, these are quite self-explanatory, and then you can do it alphabetically and things, but really, the one that matters is by overall score, because for a review site, you want it to be ranked by score. Down here, the worst games ever reviewed with a total rating of 1.1. Not a 1.0 though, so it's not as bad as it could be. E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the worst video game ever made. Anyone know what happened with that game? It lost so much money that it nearly killed the industry. It basically went into recession for a long time, took them years to recover from it, and Atari thought it was so bad, they buried all their copies of it in the desert. That really happened. It really happened. Anyway, whereas we've only ever given 3 games a perfect 10, because we believe that a 10 is sacred, because a 10 is the best. So you shouldn't just hand that out all the time. Particularly with Shadow of the Colossus, originally that was released on PlayStation 2, and the visuals were only graded a 9, whereas the PlayStation 4 re-release, because that had remastered graphics, that pushed it all the way over to a perfect 10 out of 10. Now, perhaps the most interesting review on the site is the one for Chrono Trigger, which initially was published on Sprocket Frogs, because the editor of Sprocket Frogs was holding a contest where he would take proposals from writers about retro games for long-form articles with a specific premise, and that he would then pay to be able to host them. So Moses contacted him and said, I want to write about Chrono Trigger, and I want the main premise of the article to be, is it possible for a game to objectively be the greatest of all time? Because a review site, it's just opinions, and opinions are subjective. What you want to do is try to explain, can a game be objectively the greatest? And a month after it being exclusively hosted on Sprocket Frogs, that's when he brought it over to the well-read Mage proper. But this is the longest review on the whole site. It's 17,000 words long. It takes a long time to read. I've read it 3 times, actually, but really, this is the standard that I hold myself to now, personally. And sometimes I like to just reread it to remind myself that this is the kind of thing we're going for. Because when we say long form, we mean long form. So that's just the sort of thing. Often I'll just read it to remind myself what a good review is. So, in August of 2017, we finally dropped the WordPress from the URL. We just went straight to thewellreadmage.com, and that's when he announced that we were now opening a Patreon campaign where people would be able to fund the site, because we don't believe in hosting advertisements, because they often pop up and you have to adjust the whole design of the page around it, and it's just not a very good reader experience. So we believed in just the goodwill of people who wanted it to continue to fund it using Patreon. But also, he said that one of the goals of the Patreon campaign was, in future, if it became successful, he'll be able to pay contributors. That hasn't happened yet. We're getting close to it. The main thing about this is that that's when he started taking applications. He said, right, I want to throw this out to you. I'm going to start taking open applications for writers. if you want to write for the site, who knows, get in touch, we'll see what happens. Since then, all of these people have joined up. Don't bother trying to read it all, because you won't be able to, but all of these people have joined up and they've got their own little name and their own unique hexadecimal number code. These are ordered by the order in which they applied for the site and started writing for it, apart from all the way down at the bottom where we get the Rage Mage, who only ever writes very angry rants and gets mad at things. He's quite a bit of a toxic fanboy. So you might think, well then why do you allow him to be on the site? Why would you accept him? There are rumours that the Rage Mage is actually Moses using a second pen name for when he wants to want to rant about something without damaging his name. I'm not at liberty to actually comment on that, but you know, I'll allow you to come up with your own conclusions to it. But he's not allowed in the house. We have to keep him outside in the kennel, just sort of poking him with a stick all the time. But again, I'm one of these, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. In 2014, I joined up WordPress, just on a whim. I thought maybe this can go somewhere. And then after about a year and a half of blogging, I thought, right, the New Year's coming up, I want to do this regularly. So on New Year's Day, 2015, I put up my first daily post, and I started reviewing films. I started with Superman Unbound. It's not very good, actually. But I tend to look back on those particular films themselves because they remind me of that time in my life where I just started something new and fresh. I had this wild-eyed enthusiasm, like, yeah, I'm doing this every day. This is really good. How long can I go for? Turns out, only so long because I've got studies and I have to take breaks for it. But it's when I started following the Well-Read Mage in 2016, shortly after it began, that I became a regular commenter, and it quickly became apparent now I have a particular interest in racing games because I thought, well, the thing is, video games themselves are dismissed out of hand by a lot of people who don't play them, and yet it's confusing to me that even within gaming there are still certain genres that they dismiss and sideline in the same way. I've never understood that, and I thought, well, you know, why do they not blog more about racing games? And I thought, hang on, I've got a huge backlog of them. Maybe I could be the one to make that happen. Maybe if I said there should be more there, then I could do that. So I applied, and this is the process of how you apply for the Well-Read Mage. And I've got a laser pointer, and I'm presenting a flowchart, a real flowchart, because apparently I'm successive live now. So what happens is, you send in your email application, and it's not really an application in any way, it's really just an informal thing. Because I was already a long-time reader commentator, he already knew me, so there wasn't really anything to it. But on occasion you'll get people who he doesn't know, and so that is really there just to screen them, to make sure that they're not just anyone, that they have a large body of work already written as a blog, and just to check that they still believe in things like quality journalism and integrity of writing and stuff like that. So at that point then you'll be invited to become an author, and as anyone who has written a code on blog will know, that's just when your account is merged with the other one and you can write for it. Then you'll be provided with the How to Mage document, which is really just a style guide. It's just a thing on Google Docs. Well, actually no, I have it on Google Docs, but it is also just a Word document. And it just gives you like the template, the article. Just stick within these confines. Do whatever you want within the confines, but these are just the kind of like grammar rules. Italics only for individual works, but the title of a series must not be italicized. Some titles must be written in quote marks. So it's just that kind of very technical thing. So then you'll be able to write the article and you'll be able to read it. Anyway, while you're writing the article, that's the point at which you'll be coming up with your name. And you'll say, okay, so what kind of name do you want to give yourself? And he said, normally we start with a colour. And so I said, purple. So he said, great. He said, you know, I've always thought it'd be funny if we had a purple prose mage, because I'm often accused of writing purple prose. Purple prose where you just sort of, you ramble and you talk about one long subject for a long time, and you go into far too much detail. Anyway, so I called myself the purple prose mage, because apparently it's what I do. And so once he's come up with that, that's when the sprite will be designed, and then your name and that little character will be added to the authors list, which will then link to your own page, so that that's where all the articles will go, and then it will also go to the archives. So it's not as complicated as I've really made it look. when you write your first article, or actually whenever you write any article, it will begin with a little image of you there, and then it will have the author line, just saying who's written it. It used to say guest posts. Now it tends to say contributor posts, because we think of ourselves as no longer being guests. If we've been writing for so long, then at that point we are just contributors and no longer guests. The well-read Mage himself does not use this, so if an article starts without this, then that's because he's written it, because why would he need one? Because it's his site. And of course, my sprite there was inspired by the White Mage sprite from the original games. So you can just see how it's not exactly the same, but they are heavily inspired by it and they take a lot of influences. They're quite small in the body of the article, so you might not think there's very much you can do with it, but actually, if you know what you're doing, you can create almost an infinite variance. That's when I published my first review, because I felt that this game just wasn't being talked about by enough people. And I thought, well, I'm the one that can actually make that happen. Again, it opens with a quote. This one is actually from the Cardigans. I've also realised that that quote is incorrect. It should say you're losing, not I'm losing. Anyway, but even then, I still only gave it in total an 8.3, which is essentially my way of acknowledging that I can understand that it's not perfect. I can call it my favourite, but it's still not perfect. That's the kind of thing we understand at the Well-Read Mage. That intelligence is the ability to understand contradictory ideas. You can say something is your favourite, and you can acknowledge that it's not perfect at the same time. It's that kind of complex thinking that we value. And then at the end of an article, you'll have your little author blurb. This is here for the benefit of the author themselves, so that they can promote other things they're doing, other projects, their social media, things like that. So just in case anyone wants to go out and check it out, because he believes in, well, if you're going to give me content to publish, I should at least promote you in return. Right now, what I'm currently working on, ever since the new year, is I've been working on a whole series of articles specifically about racing games, because I thought, well, I think people should talk about them more. There's not much of them on this site, and I want to make them happen. So I am now doing a weekly blog about it. For instance, because this is a weekly column, it tends to be about an unfolding theme each week. And I was explaining in the week that I did Crash Nitro Kart, which is essentially a Mario Kart game, but with Crash Bandicoot characters. I was explaining, well, the reason that it remained so popular and that it was successful is because even though it was inspired by Mario Kart, it was similar enough to still have the same appeal, but it was also different enough, and it changed things up enough for it to still be different. But then with Toy Story Racing, I thought, hang on, it's a kart racing game based on Toy Story. People should remember that, but they don't. And I think we're the only person that ever knew it existed. And I was explaining, well, why is that? How come no one remembers it? You would remember that. And ultimately, it's because actually it didn't do anything different, and it did try to be exactly the same. So it's really about a developing theme unfolding every week. So it's a weekly column. You also get your own little author bio, which isn't really anything important. It's just a fun little thing we do. We thought, well, if we've got our own little characters, they should have their own stat screen, like in a combat game. So you get your alias there. Not everyone uses their real name. One of the reasons that we even use sprites and author names is because some people just want to be anonymous. They don't want people to know who they are. So you don't have to use your alias, you can just use any online name you have somewhere. And the whole level thing, initially that starts out as just our age, we were at the time, but as time has gone on, these have now just become out of date and obsolete, and there's just a word up there that you would connect with yourself. I went through a bit of a postmodernist phase. It was just a phase, anyway. and so you can also get a few little brief descriptions that sum up your personality and just stuff like that. The primarily play section is really the important part, because it's meaningless asking me about like Halo, because Halo is an Xbox exclusive and it's not on there, so you'll know not to bother talking to me about it. But this is just a fun little thing. Most of the current writers have these, not all of them. It really depends on whether you really want one or even care. But they get shared on our Instagram page as well. Also, if you're lucky and if he likes you, he'll draw a little fan art of you. I coloured this in digitally, he just penciled it originally on paper, but I don't know, I think it's quite a good last like. Anyway, that was just a little thing. He's currently working on drawing all of them to put them together into one big picture. Now, coming back to the audio reviews. Sometimes he will do an audio review of an article that is already on the site because he thinks, well, YouTube is a big site for content creators. There's a lot of views to be had there. But he's not really interested in getting down in front of camera and doing traditional video editing because he's a writer. So he thought, if I do read versions of other articles, then that could be a good way to get views. And also, people don't necessarily want to sit down and read a long essay about a game. If it's a YouTube video, they do know how long it's going to take. So often, the audio reviews will be similar, but not necessarily the same. For instance, if we compare the audio review of Journey with the original text version.
Journey is an icon. Journey is a saga. Journey confounds categorization. It is simplicity and minimalism. Journey embraces emotions we may have forgotten. Journey taps into innate, fundamental human experiences that we all share. Journey reflects back upon you, gives you glimpses of what it is like to be a conscious being with desires we sometimes have no words for. Journey draws upon archetypes repeated throughout our complicated and sordid past. Journey plays with all the philosophies and theologies that the philosophers and theologians for countless cultures have played with for centuries. Journey is a masterpiece, a magnum opus, a great human achievement, a victory cry, a pinnacle of what can be done in the industry of gaming. Journey should stand and will stand not only as a testament of the creativity of our race, but as an allegory of our history. Journey's only flaw is that it's too short, and it will leave you wanting a lot more. And you can find more by seeking out the presence and creativity of your fellow human beings. Journey is a work of art. Journey transcends its own medium.
Still didn't give it a perfect 10 though, because a 10 is sacred. So you can see that he sometimes likes to mix it up just a little bit, throw in a few thoughts that come to him since the writing of it, just to make it a little bit different. But the main thing that the Patreon campaign has funded is podcasts. And right now we're running 2 podcasts that you can see pretty much everywhere. And the first one is called Magecast. That was the original. And Magecast is essentially a ongoing series talking about a different game each week with a revolving door of guests that he hosts. For instance, this is a rather interesting moment from when they were talking about Super Mario World.
Alright, so let's take some audience comments and questions, and then we'll wrap up this shindig here. This is from @Mulred. So my friend used to sing this song during all the underwater levels. Here are the lyrics. Did you guys read this?
I did. I'm waiting to see if you're going to actually sing it.
I don't remember how does the underwater sound go. I can't remember. I just listened to the whole. It's not the. Yeah. Okay.
No, I mean, in Super Mario World, I feel like the underwater theme is the most nondescript of them.
Yeah.
Of all of them. That's why I can't think of it. That's why we think of the underwater theme from the first Super Mario.
Yeah, and it's still a waltz too, so it's kind of it just mixes in your brain a lot. We've heard a lot of video game music too, all of us. So. Super Mario is under the sea. Super Mario is under the effing sea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come on now, you gotta read the lyrics correctly.
Well, he said what Star King C. So that's what it says. Sing that the next time you're playing one of those levels, and you'll never be able to unhear it. I don't know. Skeptical a little bit.
So there, briefly, humming. You'll have heard another one of the regular writers. He goes by the name the ABXY Mage because sometimes on a controller handset the buttons will be A, B, X and Y for left and right, up and down. So he also hosts side quests, which is like Magecast, but instead of talking about a particular game each week, it tends to be about a more wider topic that can cross into various different titles. And he's now hosting that himself with a revolving door of different guests each week. This is a thing that happened in the early days of it, talking about music in games.
Alright, so next we come to the Beethoven of video game music.
Yes, Koji Kondo. See what I did there?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
Yes.
it's actually Nobuo Uematsu, right?
Of course it is.
Okay, because I've always said that, the Beethoven of video game music.
He's your favorite, I believe.
He is my favorite, yes, my favorite video game composer. He is single-handedly responsible for me learning how to play musical instruments. He inspired me to play the piano. My first song I ever learned on the piano was I taught myself how to play Susanarkin from Final Fantasy X. And then he inspired me to play guitar. And darn it, what was the song? I know one of the songs that inspired me to learn guitar was End of Time from Chrono Cross. But I believe that was Mitsuda, not Uematsu.
So that's one of the things that I really like the most about these kind of things, that you learn about the people on it. That one of the recurring themes of the blog is that at a certain point it no longer becomes about the games and subject matter. That's just a way to learn about the people and the connection to it. And I always feel coming away from an article or a podcast that I've learned something new about that person because of a conversation that was started by the games that ultimately ended with me knowing something more. And so that's how we feel quite connected to each other and quite close. Wait, yeah, there we go. So, a while ago, he started a series called Asking the Big Questions. This was when, really, this was the beginning of the community, I would say, of the readers and writers, where he would take a question and he'd throw it out to us and he'd want our answer for it, which we could answer through commenting or just writing our own blog post and linking back to it. But rather than asking us our questions about subjective tastes or opinions, instead he'd take a question about something within the industry, a much wider topic. And he would then say, okay, what's your opinion on this? You answer it. And that really for me was the moment when we all started to come together and learn about each other, and we felt as though we were part of a big group rather than just lots of different disparate readers. But a thing happened when we were chatting, when we were discussing the long debate about whether or not video games count as an art form. And I was saying that, well, if they do, not any form of art that we can understand, because it's such an infant medium compared to novels and films that we still don't quite know where we are with it, and it's going to take generations to really understand it. And so because we had such an interesting discussion about that inspired the second Asking Big Questions over are video games art, and I would say that they are not. And the reason for that is because of something that happened recently when the site became big enough to interview industry professionals. And there was one interview with, as it says, the co-founder of Joy Masher, and in that interview the article linked to a post that she wrote on Medium called Games Are Not Art. And her main argument for that involved talking about Marcel Duchamp's fountain. This is not a fountain, this is a urinal. And he entered that urinal into an art exhibition. Except that it had been accepted as the most influential modern artwork of all time by the 500 experts who also nominate the recipient of the Turner Prize. In other words, if a urinal, not any special kind of urinal, just an ordinary gentleman's lavatory urinal can become accepted as a work of art, then now art can be anything. The definition has been expanded to include anything. And so if art is now anything, there's no point debating what is and isn't art because it's meaningless now. But also, I don't play games for any art that they may or may not have. I play games because I like games, and any artfulness that they may or may not have is just neither here or there. And then there's another series that he did called Anatomy of a Game Review, when he thought, well, since most people responded to that question saying that they thought games are art, how come you can't learn games criticism in most places? You can learn to study film, and you can learn to critique literature and to closely read literature, but he thought, how come you can't learn a course conventionally, mainstream, on video game criticism? So he decided that he was going to do that himself, and he called it Anatomy of a Game Review, hence the title of this presentation, Anatomy of the World of Mage. And each article is on a different topic in which he's just talking about various different things. For example, why should we bother having categories? Why should we bother having different points? How do we review games when it seems that developers and gamers seem to be against each other? There's this strange kind of animosity they have for each other. And what it does is it basically just breaks down the different aspects of games criticism with the premise of, well, this is still such a young medium. We don't really understand this. So why bother doing this, and why bother having this in it and this in it and this in it, so that we either reinforce why we do it, or we can improve why we do it and make it even better. So now those two series, you can find them in the categories page. Currently, we're coming up on 4,000 followers, although we are still a bit of a way off on that. So we don't really have any plans at this moment, but I'm excited to see what will happen when we get there. Also, last February was the anniversary of when the site published its first review, that Final Fantasy 13 review, the one that was so influential to the tone that the site would have going forwards. And so the site was redesigned, and we unveiled a new design on that day, and it was redesigned by Matthew from the Normal Happenings blog. And Normal Happenings right now is planning the 4th of a series of blogger collaborations that he does. He tends to do them a couple of times a year, which is how I initially discovered him. And I took part in the second and third collaborations, which was the games that define us and Tracking Shells and Mario Kart Memories. This is really a very interesting thing, because the whole point of this series is actually the games are starting point. It's not really about the games themselves. It's about the memories that we have of them in our life and how they brought us closer to someone, or why they came to matter so much for some other emotional reason. But again, it's not really about the games themselves. But in those collabs, it was all of these people that was involved in them. And as a result, for each and every single one of these people, simply through blogging about gaming and the place or emotional value for a particular video game and why, because of that, I now feel much closer, significantly closer to each and every one of these people, because we have a mutual understanding of each other. Because being a part of gamer culture, we can tell, actually, I thought I was the only one who ever felt this way about a game. But it turns out that we all do. For example, I was up there, and I was talking about Warcraft 3, so that was a little thing. We actually put all the Warcraft posts together, but I'd encourage you to go and read these, even if you're not a gamer, just because you'll learn so much about them as a person. So, here we are. We've gone through the history of the site and the present, what it's currently up to. I think in terms of the future, there is the inevitable problem of the more writers you get, then the more administration there is. And the problem with administration is that if you have too much of it, it can feel very impersonal. And how do you maintain that direct relationship between the publisher and the writer? And that's something that we've got to consider. Because you also have to ensure that each of those writers is still respecting the values of long-term critique and close analysis. I'd say that because there's a screening process, it's not that much of a problem, and that because we do use a lot of direct messaging services and forums, that the direct relationship is still easily maintainable. But we're not quite sure where this is going, because the whole thing of it being long-form critique and close analysis, that may have completely failed. He just thought, that's the thing I think is worth doing, because it's so rare, talking about gaming. But then it's all of these people, and it's all of the readers, and it's all of the commenters that decided, actually, we get that, we connect with it, we feel that way too. We think there's a broken discourse on the internet when it comes to talking about gaming. So they decided that the Well-Read Mage should continue to exist. For instance, we've got this quote here. This is from C.S. Lewis. And this is from a passage that he wrote when he was talking about the way that wanting to be grown up and to be interested in grown-up things is actually a very childish thing to do. And that it's as you get older that you learn to appreciate the things you were interested in when you were younger, and you realise actually the age doesn't matter. And if you like something, that's all that's important. And that's the belief that we have as well. So really, what's happened is he put it onto the internet, just this one blog, and he thought, yeah, this is my idea of it, let's see where this goes. And the reason it's continued to exist is because all of these people, and the readers and the commenters, decided that they like the idea and that they believe in the idea. So really, this exists, and it continues to exist and to thrive because of belief. It's about belief, not necessarily a faith, but a kind of belief that this idea should exist and that it can exist. Personally, for me, if you told me back in the late 90s, when I was living in a tiny house, I had just a PS1, and it was just a small grey square. If you told me, one day, that internet, the thing that has to dial up really slowly to make that noise, one day, that's going to be really fast, and everyone's going to have it. And on the internet, you're going to be writing about the games you're playing now and the games you're going to play in the future. And you're going to be doing it with a whole community of other people. And you're going to be doing it properly. You're going to be thinking about it analytically. And you're going to be thinking about it intelligently. Obviously, I wouldn't have believed any of that, because I'd have not been interested. I would have gone back to playing the game. But I do feel as though this has validated a part of me. Just having grown up playing games, thinking, well, this hasn't really got me anywhere. But all of a sudden, yes, it has. Because I had this massive backlog, and I thought, that's it. It's because I've been playing games for so many years in my life that I had them all there, and that I was able to talk about them. Oh. well, the good thing is that was actually the last slide. So maybe I can time that perfectly. Who knows? But that's just my personal feelings on it. And I think, will I ever stop writing for the world at Mage? Inevitably I will, because everything ends eventually. But I think somewhere out there in the future, there's a version of me that is thinking about the me of now. And he's remembering the time he used to do it, and the fun that he had. And I want to give him something to remember, and I think I will always remember when I wrote for the World of Mage. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes. First of all,